What's going on, everybody? Happy Wednesday, and welcome to the RotoGrinders DFS Pick 6. I'm Eric Crain. I'm joined, as I am every single time. But look at these two guys with their good-looking beards, their good-looking bald heads. I mean, that is just a couple of beautiful you-know-whats there. We got John Daigle. What's up, Daigle? How are we doing today?
We are doing great outside of the long conversation we had before we came on the show about it now being officially winter on the East Coast. And we're struggling, buddy. We're struggling.
Yeah, I mean, Reeves, you and I are over here in the Midwest. Like we are freezing our you-know-whats off, too. I don't know why Daigle thinks he has like a monopoly on like cold weather over there on the East Coast, but you're in Ohio. I'm in Southern Illinois. Like, it's cold as hell here, too, man.
Yeah, we've gotten snow the last few days. I know people were worried for the Browns game tomorrow a little bit, but it looks like it's going to be kind of just cold and clear. But, hey, man, we're going to deal with it. I'm a summer baby, but, I've been here for 6 months of gray every year for, the last, 30 years. So whatever.
If you're worried about the Browns, you should be worried more than the snow. I'll say that much. At least of your concerns.
Maybe that's what's happened to Baker Mayfield. He goes from sunny Oklahoma to now he's just up there in Cleveland, and he just looks sad all the time. He had to buy that coat, not because he wanted to look like a homeless guy, but because he actually just did not know what kind of coat to buy because he didn't understand living down there in Norman. Maybe that's what happened because, yeah, dude, Baker's just toast.
Out of all the things Baker's done this year, still the most egregious thing are these progressive commercials. Like, we've got to put a kibosh on these already. Like, these things got to go.
Wait. I don't know these progressive commercials.
Yeah, where he's just, cleaning up the stadium and
getting his wife never mind. I've seen that. Yeah. He's auditioning for his next job.
Yeah. We got to kill those, man. We got to get those. Get those off the air.
Poor Baker. All right, before we jump into the slate, I want to let you guys know, RotoGrinders, this is really neat. We are holding another free roll on Yahoo this week. Yahoo Lineup HQ. It's free on Saturday and Sunday this week. There's an MME free roll, $2,500 in that tournament, 150 entries. Throw them in there. Yahoo, they've recently introduced allowing to put 150 lineups in there. If you want to check out the RotoGrinders Lineup HQ, this is the weekend to do it. If you might not be a premium member, you're on the fence about whether to sign up, check it out because you're going to see that it is worth it. Also, want to give a shout-out to a few new guys rocking the RotoGrinders badge, and I want to thank Drake. We have Drake, guys. Drake is straight up rocking the RotoGrinders badge. Thanks, Drake. And Stevie L24. I'm not going to lie, Steve, I love you, man, but when you have to go behind Drake, you're just screwed at that point. Nobody's going to get excited about your name. But, Steve, welcome. Drake, go Raptors. So, Reeves, what do we think about this slate as a whole?
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be pretty fun. It's weird. We're coming off of last week, and, it's just crazy. We've had a lot of conversations this year about just how far DFS has come and, the public playing side. And, man, seeing Christian Kirk's ownership last week was something crazy. I mean, I know we had the Will Fuller week where it was kind of like awakening. It was everyone was sharp, but, Christian Kirk was a longer play. The matchup was there and the price was there and we were all on that, but he still took a step of faith for that type of ownership. It was pretty wild to see him, that highly owned in tournaments, way over 30%, 70, 80%, certain cash formats. It was an interesting week last week, but it ended up being high scoring. I had some nice Daniel Jones, Darius Slayton lineups that got nuked by David Montgomery. That was pretty fun. It was a fun week, and we're moving on to this week where I like what DraftKings is doing because they're really just kind of upped it on pricing. They're saying listen, do you want to play Chris McCaffrey? Here, you have to pay for him. Oh, you want Michael Thomas against the Bucs? Guess what? You got to pay for him too. I like that. It makes it, it makes it a lot more fun. It makes it a lot harder. We seen last week there was an internal debate all week about do we pay for Christian McCaffrey or not, back and forth in the industry, and you kind of both sides of the argument won. Christian McCaffrey still hit. He didn't hit 3x, but he still was. Christian McCaffrey lineups were good, and then people set a lot of good lineups without Christian McCaffrey as well. So we're in that same boat again with him at 10.5, and you got Michael Thomas at 9.9 on DK. So I like what they're doing, at least pricing wise.
Anytime you see Tony Pollard at 5K on DraftKings, you know that DraftKings literally just said, okay, 3 snaps. You want to pay for Christian McCaffrey? We are truly going to make you pay for Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. If you're looking for value this week, outside of Brian Hill, it ain't going to come at the running back position. We'll take a look at it. And even that, he's not that cheap, 4.8. Reeves, when's the last time that a guy like Brian Hill was 4.8? I know he's going to be starting, but I don't know. It's interesting. I like what they're doing. I like making.
We'll talk about him. He's on the docket that you put out for us.
It's super interesting because unlike past years and as recently as last year, you can't look and pull up the site and assume you're getting a 3K, 3.5K guy anymore. Like they are pricing backups according to if injuries were to happen. They're not waiting for injuries to happen anymore. So you're just not getting backups under 4K any longer for the rest of the year.
It's interesting. It's definitely different. I like that. But yeah, and of course we're going to talk about Brian Hill. We're going to talk about a lot of these other guys looking for some value. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. It's Saints at the Bucks. It's a 50-point total. The Saints 5-point favorites on the road. And Daigle, I got to ask you, what the hell happened last week with the Saints?
The Saints in general, and trust me, I know as someone who had quite a bit of Jameis Winston in that particular matchup, it should have been better, but instead what happened is that we did get O.J. Howard. We did somehow get Ronald Jones in the passing game, and I'm sure we'll talk about more Ronald Jones in just a second. But those targets that usually go to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin kind of filtered elsewhere unexpectedly. And that's really just what happened against a set of corners that should have seen Evans and Godwin prosper. However, we know in the last month what those two can do all year long, what those two can do really. Godwin the past 4 weeks, still just over 10 targets. Evans in that time, 12 targets. And before his 8 target, what we consider a letdown or dud, coming into that game with 15 targets. So it's not something you're scared about Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. I think it comes more or less down to deciphering which one we want to use because they still don't break out at the same time. And so game script sort of has dictated what one or the other has done. And that's what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, you look at this Tampa Bay side, and last week was really the first time that neither Godwin nor Evans, failed to get there from a fantasy standpoint. It was, like you said, Ronald Jones. And Daigle, it was you that tweeted out Ronald Jones' high school pass usage, right?
Yeah.
Impressive.
I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was 8 catches total in high school, 14 catches his senior year at USC, 8 catches his freshman season, 8 catches weeks 1 through 9, and then one random Sunday, 8 catches.
I'm not going back to the well there. I'm not doing it. I'm over. And you know what? You know who else I'm not going back to, Reeves? Just because he had a good week does not mean that O.J. Howard and I are cool. I'm still not going back to O.J. Howard. I played him a little last week, and you know what? I'm just going to take whatever money I got back. I got a little rebate on every single dollar that I've lit on fire with O.J. Howard this year. And I'm not going back to him. Are you going back to OJ this week?
I think it's fair. You were the one that wanted to play him more than all of us last week. And, I dabbled and put some in. We kind of talked about, though, his usage is started to turn, though. I mean, over his past 3 games, he's run a pass route on 57% of his snaps. It was just 42% prior. Last week, he played 99% of the offensive snaps, 98.8. He ran a pass route on 41 of 52 dropbacks for Jameis Winston. Cameron Brate was not on the field. He played 15 snaps. Now, this matchup isn't as high. Like, it's not the flow chart. The flow chart isn't applicable here. The Saints are 28th in yards per target to opposing tight ends, and they face the 6th fewest targets per game to the position. So, I mean, it's not a lot to really latch onto here for matchup-wise. But, yeah, I mean, he's not a guy we have to go back onto. We cheated the system. We got our touchdown. We take it, and we run to the hills.
Yeah, we move on. And, you talk about Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. We're still waiting on news with Marshawn Lattimore. I don't think we're going to know whether he's going to play at least for a couple days.
He's not going to play.
I don't think he's going to play, honestly.
I don't think he's going to play either, but I was just trying to build the suspense. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. No suspense here. That's fine. But with Marshawn Lattimore out, all of a sudden, Daigle, this secondary gets a lot worse. And this is going to be another week where I'm going to be loading up with Godwin and or Evans on a lot of my teams.
I totally agree, and I like Godwin's matchup a lot in the slot against P.J. Williams, who's been just a bust all year. P.J. Williams allowed 220 yards and a score in the slot, and the slots where we target the Saints as a whole. But what can you say? Like, it's not like Evans is a bad play either. It just has become with the Bucs really multi-entry teams where you have to get both in. And as Reeves talked about Howard's usage, that's what really threw a wrench in the whole situation. Just the fact he's running a route now, 1 week at least, on 85% of Jameis Winston's dropbacks. That's another target, whereas it was much more concentrated and focused before that one random game. So if even Ronald Jones hit a season high in routes run, the target share was probably a fluke. Yeah, regression is going to hit. But just the fact he did 18 routes run in week 9 and then 24 per season high in week 10, I would imagine, especially after Bruce Arians came out today and said, oh, no, like we still want him involved in the passing game, even if that fourth quarter fumble that happened and then put Peyton Barber on the field for the entire final drive of the game, even if that kicks back Ronald Jones carries, on DraftKings still, even though his salary's gone up, he's still going to get the targets, I would assume. So it's not all too terrible of a play.
And I mean, do you have a preference here, Reeves, between Godwin and Evans? Because I really don't, but I kind of like Evans, but I always like Evans over Godwin. Again, it's sort of, flip a coin. Do you have a preference?
I mean, I lean just like a little bit towards Godwin just because of the matchup sense, but I mean, it's really like a 1A, 1B. In my ranks, I have him 3 and 4. My personal rankings. So
I have him 4 and 5 in my ranks, and that's only because I still have DeAndre Hopkins over them. But with Will Fuller back, and we'll talk about that in a second, I would move them up, but they're going to always stay glued together wherever they go.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the targets are concentrated. It's going to be a back and forth game. They're going to have to throw. I mean, it's going to be interesting. We know where the ball goes with the Bucs. Even with OJ Howard getting sprinkled in and then finally using Ronald Jones in the passing game. I mean, Ronald Jones was still quite a mixed bag last week. I mean, I know that he got the targets, but I mean, he still lost a fumble, was taken off the field for the game-winning goal line carry for Peyton Barber. He still has been just a non-factor in the running game. He still objectively looks bad. Like he's not a good runner. Like when the ball is in his hands, he's not good. So I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons that happened last week. But hey, you got there. The points got there. He hit it at 43. Got a little price bump this week. Arian said they're going back to him, so I mean, you can still dabble there.
He's still better than David Johnson, though, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that's everyone, David Johnson.
I tweeted during the game last week that David Johnson was running like 2018 Rob Gronkowski, and he was rough. He was rough in that game. But not to make this about David Johnson, but Marshawn Lattimore, he didn't miss any games last year. His rookie season when he was electric. Did he win Defensive Player of the rookie year? I can't remember. But he missed 3 games as a rookie, and the Saints got roasted in all 3 of those games. They gave up over 350 passing yards to rookie Jared Goff in a game Marshawn Lattimore missed. Kenny Britt kind of dotted them up. So, I mean, losing him is a big deal. And he had been playing well outside of the first month of the season. And, I mean, Evans caught 0 passes the last time these teams played. That's not happening again. So, I mean, you look at Jameis, he had almost 18 fantasy points in a game where Evans caught 0 passes. So we have to feel a little bit better about him. He's gone over 300 passing yards now in 6 of his past 7 games. He's hit that 17-point mark in 6 of the past 7. So I mean, he's looking a lot more positive. You remove Lattimore from the situation. So I mean, we know where the Bucs are going with the ball, and I think we expect this to be a shootout because all Tampa Bay games have been shootouts at this point. I mean, all their games combined for 59.9 combined points per game. It's the most in the league. Almost all their games go over, it feels like. So, I mean, we want to circle this game. We want to get in. Hopefully some people have some terrible feelings in their mouth about playing Saints players last week because I want to play some Saints players.
Yeah, and, I think if you're looking at the Saints, obviously it's Michael Thomas. But the 9.9 price tag, you guys brought it at the beginning of the show where it's tough to click that button at that price tag, especially for a receiver, a position that – is high variance, even though Michael Thomas isn't really high variance. But we know the Tampa Bay Bucs, probably the worst secondary in the league. They just cut Vernon Hargreaves, who's been terrible. Daigle, I like Michael Thomas. I even like a little Ted Ginn. Alvin Kamara is a guy that just screwed everybody that played him last week. But this spot, maybe it's not a bounce back spot because the Bucs defense is really good. Where are you going on the Saints?
It's very much just like Christian McCaffrey's price point and situation last week, where I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's going to come down to roster construction Saturday night, Sunday morning, whenever you build your lineups. And Michael Thomas, I would argue he's the safest play, even among running backs getting 20 touches. I think Michael Thomas is still the safest play on the slate. Not only does Marshawn Lattimore's absence help the Saints' defense as a whole. But you talked about their bad corners. I mean, they literally just got worse. They were already allowing a league high in fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. I think it's 25 points per game. And then obviously they cut Hargreaves midweek. But then MJ Stewart, second corner, he's out 3 to 4 weeks now. Carlton Davis didn't practice today with a hip injury. He's out. So that leaves 2 rookies and a guy who has played 2 snaps all year as their starting corners right now. So if we expect the Bucs to score, I would imagine we also expect the Saints to keep their foot on the gas. And so Michael Thomas, FanDuel, his price only went up $300 from last week. If you played him last week, you're probably playing him this week. Yeah. DraftKings is the big situation. I think it just comes down to roster construction in the end. But it's pretty easy to say he's an amazing, amazing play.
Yeah, and Reeves, when I look at this spot, everybody knows Michael Thomas is really great. I've heard a few people talk about Jared Cook. I don't hate Ted Ginn this week. Who are you going with on the Saints?
So I think still in cash, and if we're talking cash to tournaments. So in cash, I think Cook is in play. He's been a top 8 scorer now in each of his past 3 games played. 2 of those were at Teddy Bridgewater. In his first full game played at Breeze since week 1, he got 10 targets last week. Tampa Bay has been just a step below Arizona on the flow chart. They're 29th in receptions, 31st in yards per game to tight ends. They're 30th in touchdowns allowed. They even gave up a tight end 5 week to Cook himself, when Teddy Bridgewater played and these teams met in week 5. So I think he's in play, especially at 4,400. I think on DK it's a little more palatable. I think that if you're looking at tournament plays, I think the guy is Traquan Smith. He came back last week. He played 83% of the snaps. Ted Ginn played 69% of the snaps. Ginn still had 3 targets to 2, but Traquan was the guy on the field and he ran more routes than him. You guys said it's almost all hands on deck when you're facing the Bucs, because they're a pass funnel. They stop the run well and they just bleed, bleed and hemorrhage passing yards to teams. They can't stop anyone in the air. So not only do they invite teams to pass on them, they invite teams to beat them efficiently. So, I think the Saints are going to acquiesce to that and throw the ball a lot in this game. I think we'll see. I like Traquan as the dart play, because you can't wide receiver to a full-time usage. The problem is that Michael Thomas is so good. He's taking away so many targets. He has 67% of the wide receiver targets on this team. That's the highest of a wide receiver has for a share of his wide receiver targets in the league. Allen Robinson is next at 49%. It's almost a 20% gap to the next highest guy that commands his wide receiver targets. It's just unreal. He's so good that they just keep throwing to him. So that kind of hurts the other guys from taking these stabs on these guys because it's hard to run into an 8-target, Traquan Smith game now because Michael Thomas is just destroying.
Yeah, you're hoping to hit big plays. You're hoping to hit big plays with those guys. You're
right. Yeah. And at 3,800, you're just hoping you hit a bomb and you crush. I like going back to Breeze. He totally ruined a spot for us last week. I've already seen people kind of cite his stats, in Tampa. He's had some really rough games in Tampa Bay against some bad defense. Look at last year, 13.9 points, 2017, 14 points. The year before that, 4.5. I don't know if this guy is crushing Mons Venus too hard in Tampa on Saturday night before that, but it's hard to just move away from him in this spot. We've talked about the Bucs defense just being a target every single week. You just run down this quick slate. Kyler Murray last week, 27. The week before, Russ, 39. Ryan Tannehill, 19.4. Kyle Allen, 17.4. Teddy Bridgewater, 27.3. Jared Goff, 21. Daniel Jones, 34. That's over their past 7 games. That's just inviting, fantasy points. So I'm all in on the Saints side. I want the ancillary pieces. I want the ancillary jabronis, as we call them on this show. I want to get those. I want to get those that guys.
Band name. The greatest
I want to get them in
history. Ancillary jabronis. I love it. Didn't we have a shirt, like a rock and roll shirt made at some point? I think
RotoWare made one. RotoWare hooked us up with one last year.
Yes, RotoWare. I love you guys. So ancillary jabronis. I might have to get that shirt to wear it down to Nashville.
We got to create a new band name now, somewhere along the way.
Yeah, well, and it's okay, Daigle. You're all right. You were the third choice.
I know. I feel left out now. All we do is talk about bad quarterbacks. Y'all used to talk about ancillary jabronis.
All right, let's talk Houston at Baltimore. 49-point total. Baltimore, 4.5-point favorites at home. And Daigle, we saw the Lamar Jackson last week that we have wanted to see for 2 years now. He had the big-time 40-yard touchdown run. He looked like an absolute stud. Cincinnati, of course, had no answer for him. And Do you think this Houston Texans defense is going to have an answer for him this week?
I would not imagine so. J.J. Watt accounted for so much of their pass rushing production, whatever they were getting even at the time. And now you look, and yes, they added so we just made fun of Vernon Hargreaves. And then, of course, today we recorded this on a Wednesday night. They are the team that claimed Vernon Hargreaves. So if they have to put him out there with Garyon Conley, who they claimed off waivers, who was arguably Oakland's worst corner, and Bradley Roby, old 34-year-old Jonathan Joseph, who continues battling soft tissue injuries throughout the year. This is not a secondary, nor is it a defense that has any athletic presence to block whatever Lamar Jackson brings to the table. Deshaun Watson, however, we're going to talk about this more in a bit, but Deshaun Watson also averages over 9 yards per attempt when he's trailing. So if we expect the Ravens offense to blow up, and we do, we also expect the Texans offense to blow up. And we know where this Ravens offense goes. A little wacky the past 2 weeks because we had the past two games because we had two blowout game scripts over the Patriots and then over the Bengals, who just that's the best offensive approach I've seen all year, to give up and give Joe Mixon 32 touches because they had no other response. They had no answer whatsoever. So yeah, we didn't know it's going to go though to Marquise Brown, who I wouldn't expect him to play 40% of the snaps in a competitive game. You can get away with that when you're leading 3 scores. If this game's 1 score the whole way, Marquise Brown's going to play more. And then of course Mark Andrews, who we were worried after the Patriots game, played just around 30% of their snaps, but last week back up to his normal. People look at his snaps and around 50% on this season. Last week 51%. And yes, he's still playing with Nick Boyle and Hayden Hurst along the whole way. But last week, he still ran a route on 94% of Lamar Jackson's dropbacks. He's still on the field as a pass-catching tight end every time he's on the field. So that's still usage I'm chasing if you're playing Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, and Lamar Jackson's just one of these guys where if you're paying up, he's always a fine option. The question is, can you pay 7-7 for a quarterback on this slate? And Reeves, that's what I kind of keep looking at because I want to play Lamar Jackson. I want to have him on my fantasy team. But on this slate where we're looking at a 9-9 Michael Thomas, where we're looking at a 10-5 Christian McCaffrey, where it seems like a lot of other people are priced up, can we really play Lamar Jackson, Reeves?
I mean, you can. It's hard to do it. I mean, he is. I mean, listen, man, Lamar Jackson is completely my brand. He's like this. Him doing this is just brings a flutter to my heart every week.
He wears a Rich Hribar shirt.
I mean, I don't even tweet Konami code. I just tweet the code now. Like last week when he had that run, it was just that was the quintessential play. That was it, man. That was the ultimate cheat code type of play. You see him just ultimate spin, putting shades on the sideline. It was just what are you gonna do about it, man? Deal with it. But yeah, it's a little tough, especially because it's the quarterback position. It's the one position where we can make up points even when it's a 30-point score. We're still able to get. Hedge those types of guys who need to pay up. So, I mean, I really never play the top guy. It's going to be hard this week to do it at the quarterback position. Houston's been really good against the run, but I think you just have to throw out those types of stats against this Ravens offense because it's so unique. I mean, their rushing stats come from their quarterback on designed runs, not only runnings. They run so much, RPO. They do so many unique formations. I mean, with Greg Roman, he's done this for his entire career. I mean, Colin Kaepernick, Tyrod Taylor, he's just bred success out of these offenses on the ground in terms of efficiency. So, I mean, even though Houston's been really good against the run, I'm not really worried about what they do here. I mean, Mark Ingram's just not a guy I typically play anyways because we talked about it with Marlon Mack last week. And, sometimes you miss out on a Derrick Henry game from last week, but, I mean, you also avoid Marlon Mack games. When my guys just don't catch passes and they're reliant on scoring touchdowns, they're typically not guys that make my lineup. So, I mean, Mark Ingram is 32% of his fantasy points have come from inside the 5-yard line this season. That's the most of all top 200 scorers in fantasy football. I mean, if he doesn't score a touchdown, you are really left holding the bag. So it's hard to play him. I like Marquise Brown a lot, like John alluded to. I mean, you get kind of frustrated with his usage a little bit, not even in blowouts, because, I mean, he's only had more than 4 catches in one game this season. But Houston is just the team we have targeted, not only with wide receiver play, but speed wide receiver play. Tyreek Hill, 5 for 80 and 2 touchdowns. T.Y. Hilton, 6 for 74 and a touchdown. Tyrell Williams, 91 yards and a touchdown. Ted Ginn had over 100 yards against them. over 17 PPR points per game from all those guys. There's just no one on the field that Houston has that can run with Marquise Brown. So, I mean, he's the guy I'd be looking to the most. I mean, with Mark Andrews, I mean, this is why I never cared about tight end snap shares ever. All that matters in routes and target per routes. And Mark Andrews leads all NFL tight ends in target rate per route run at 32%. It's the only stat that matters for Mark Andrews in terms of usage. When he's on the field, he's running routes. When he's running routes, they're throwing it to him. That's all that matters. Who cares about how many snaps he's playing? Yep. We don't get points for snaps or blocks. You know, we don't care about that. We want pass catches and yards. Now, the problem with Mark Andrews from that light, though, is he's only gone over 45 yards twice in his past 6 games. They both came against the Bengals. You know, so, you know, he's not really done a lot outside of those 2 really cherry matchups. So you have to pay up for him continuously. That's what makes him hard as well. But I'm looking at Marquise Brown, salivating at Marquise Brown. I want to get him in this week.
Yeah, and if you're playing him on the Ravens side and you can't afford Lamar Jackson, how about a little Deshaun Watson on the Texans side? Because, Daigle, you mentioned earlier they should be throwing a ton. I don't think Deshaun Watson is going to garner a lot of ownership this week, and you can pair him up with Hopkins. You can even pair him up with Will Fuller, who's in another good matchup. And I like this Texans passing offense almost as much as I do guys from the Saints-Bucks game.
Yeah, the Ravens have admittedly improved their defense the past few games. Before they went into their bye, they added Marcus Peters, who had that pick 6. Then they went to their bye and came back out and got Jimmy Smith back healthy. So now you have Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith on the outside, Marlon Humphrey and Earl Thomas guarding the middle of the field. But either way, it's still Deshaun Watson, right? Like, no matchup matters. That's kind of why I like the ancillary pieces, not the ancillary jabronis, but the ancillary pieces in this game, because you have Darren Fells, who's a 2-touchdown kind of guy who could take you over the top at a cheaper price in this kind of matchup if you think their corners can contain Hopkins and Fuller. And Fuller is interesting because I would think his ownership finally goes below 30% since it is his first game back, especially from a hamstring injury that could re-aggravate. So yeah, whatever the case, I like Deshaun Watson as well. He's going to catch lower ownership, I would imagine, than Lamar Jackson. Maybe you can pull it up actually on your end and tell me what you have projected at RotoGrinders.
Yeah, it's about Deshaun Watson's got about half the ownership of Lamar Jackson right now.
Okay, yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, like I said, whether you want to stack the ancillary pieces or DeAndre Hopkins or Will Fuller, I think all are fine. I'm slightly concerned, however, with Will Fuller, because as we know, before Will Fuller got injured, with DeAndre Hopkins, because before Will Fuller got injured, Hopkins was wide receiver 15 on DraftKings and FanDuel, averaging a 28% target share, ADOT still under 10 yards. Will Fuller disappears, and he doesn't take up all those air yards. He still has an ADOT around 8.9 in the last 3 games. However, he's taken all of Will Fuller's targets. 36% target share and wide receiver 4 in the last 3 games. And now with Fuller back, if he's a full-time player, I mean, it's worrisome to pay up for Hopkins at that price.
I don't hate that. I think it makes perfect sense. Reeves, what do you think about this Houston attack?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you guys have alluded to when we like to play Deshaun Watson when he's an underdog. In games, his 14 career games as an underdog, he's averaging 2.2 touchdowns, 273 passing yards, 8.3 yards per attempt, as opposed to 1.8 touchdowns, 249 yards, and 8.1 yards per attempt as a favorite. The other thing about Deshaun Watson is that for his career, he is like really awesome against the blitz. And the Ravens blitz at the highest rate in the NFL, 49.4%. Against the blitz for his career, his completion percentage is 70.3%. He averages 8.7 yards per attempt against the blitz, 106.1 quarterback rating. They're all above his rate stats when he's not blitzed. The other thing, too, and if a blitz team's going to blitz a lot, what else does that do? And play man-to-man. You open up lanes to run and escape the pocket. So, I mean, you've got rushing upside from Deshaun Watson here as well, kind of back and forth. It's a real tough year for old white men watching football because the quarterback play, like you look at all these guys, they're all runners, mobile passers. It's been a tough year for those guys. Your grandpa is having a tough time watching football.
They're definitely not watching this game.
But I mean, I love everything about this game. Now, the thing about the Ravens, though, is like I kind of really am starting to believe in these changes that they've made and getting healthy on defense, that it's an actual problem. And they might start to be a defense we might start to look at kind of avoid. I mean, they absolutely nuked Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson completed less than half of his passes. He was awful against the Ravens. Now that they're healthy and they've got these three corners and they move Brandon Carr to safety with Earl Thomas, like their secondary is bona fide right now. Tom Brady was the QB20 when they played him. I mean, he can't move around, but like I said, what they did to Russ at home in Seattle, it's kind of an eye opener. I mean, and we've had a couple down moments from Watson, and they've come against, kind of stickier matchups, the Jags game, the Colts game. So, I mean, there's some downside there. I mean, he's a tournament-only play for me, but I think he's a fun tournament play because you can cross-stack him in a unique way. Like you said, Jason, getting leverage of just against people. If this game pops and it goes back and forth, you're getting half the ownership of Lamar Jackson for a guy that can, one, use his legs, two, has two really good wide receivers, and then, some good ancillary pieces like John alluded to, and, Duke Johnson, Darren Fells, Kenny Stills, and some guys that can really carry some weight if they go off, DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller.
I would love more reason to play Duke Johnson. Like, that's the guy I would want to play more. But, I mean, his last game, yes, he spiked that receiving touchdown, but it was the fewest routes he's run this entire month. So, still concerning.
Dude, why do teams hate Duke Johnson?
I'm going Isabella, right? There has to be something behind the scenes we don't know.
Are we sure he's good?
I believe he's definitely good.
I believe he's amazing.
Every time he touches the ball, he's good.
And he gets cut by every team he's on, or he's traded by every team he's on. Nobody likes him.
I would say he's not used as a bell cow any team. Instead, they're giving Carlos Hyde 20 carries a game, which actually, to his benefit, like Carlos Hyde hasn't looked the worst. Like Carlos Hyde has looked pretty good. But Duke Johnson is still more explosive than Carlos Hyde.
Duke's been a top 30 scorer his last 4 games. He's coming off a season-high 12 touches. Mm-hmm. I mean, they got the secondary pieces to kind of match up with these wide receivers. I mean, he's been scoring points. Now, he scored some touchdowns, but they're using him more in terms of getting him the football. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to make this about Duke Johnson. Let's not do that.
Yeah. We don't want to have a Duke Johnson segment? That's disappointing. That's what we were going to talk about during the running back segment.
He's an ancillary jabroni. That's it.
Ancillary jabroni. All right, let's talk Atlanta at Carolina. 49.5 point total. Carolina, 5.5 point favorites at home. And Reeves, I'm going to start with you because does this line seem a little low to you?
It does, but, for I think a lot of us thought that, going into 3 weeks ago that Dan Quinn was going to get fired going into the bye week. And he didn't. Instead, Dan Quinn, after 8 weeks of egregious and embarrassing defensive play calling, swallowed his pride, let Jeff Albrecht take over as the defensive coordinator. Up until that point, through 8 weeks before their bye week, the Falcons allowed teams to score at the highest rate per drive, the most touchdowns per drive. They were 32nd in the league in defending third downs. Last week, they don't give any touchdowns to the Saints. They hold the Saints to 3 for 12 on third down. They allow only 310 total yards to the Saints, 52 rushing yards. And it was the 9th time in franchise history for the Falcons they recorded 6+ sacks. This is a team that had 7 sacks before last week. Like, what is going on? Like, what happened last week? Is this real? Like, this is just a variance? Is it a one-off? Did the changes are they applicable going forward? How do we, like, this threw such a wrench into everything. Like, if you thought you were going to string Kyle Allen, like, I can't wait to string Kyle Allen if I've got, whoever I'm buying. Like, this thing last week, I don't know. Like, maybe it was just, a hand grenade. The Saints ran into a hand grenade. They were terrible out of the bye. Whatever. But, I mean, the fact that it exists and that we're even talking about it right now is interesting. And it's an interesting, component to this game because they had just been completely horrible and steamrolled defensively. The personnel didn't change, so was the scheme change, the defensive play calling that much, or did the Saints just come out and lay an egg? We'll get a good, extension of that sample size now this week because there are guys we're going to want to play. And obviously everyone's going to play Christian McCaffrey. We probably don't need to talk to him. But, Brian Hill is the guy everyone wants to talk about. It's kind of a fun dynamic because, he's taking over the backfield. They just have Kenyon Barner and Quadre Olison behind him. And Carolina is a complete opposite. They get just pounded on the ground and are hard to pass on. They don't care about stopping the run necessarily. But the Falcons can't run the football, not even when they have game script in their favor. I mean, they're 23rd in percent of plays that go for 10 or more rushing yards, whereas Carolina's last in the league. They allow 17.4% of the rushing attempts against the Falcons go for 10 or more yards. The rest of the league rate outside of them is only 11%. So not even they're a little bit higher, like they're way higher. they give up the highest percent of yards gained against them are through rushing. Just 20% of the yards gained by the Falcons have come via rushing. It's the lowest rate in the league. So, I mean, he's so cheap, but there's maybe a little bit of a byproxy that maybe they can't run on anyone, no matter who's behind, in the backfield. But touches are all we care about, and he's got the pass catching ability. So, I mean, it's hard to ignore him at 5'9" and 4'8" on both sites. Because Carolina has just been so bad. So, I mean, I think you have to swallow and play Brian Hill this week, at least from a catch stance.
Yeah, and you look at like the spot, and I know that they can't run anybody. I fully understand that. But Carolina can't stop anybody on the ground. And that's what I keep going back to. We have we have a spot that Atlanta should be able to have success with. Daigle, do you think Brian Hill's going to have success?
Yeah, I think Brian Hill is an amazing play. Both DFS season long, he is as cheap as we are truly going to get for a bell cow across sites all year long. If you're looking for the athletic profile on him, set school records at Wyoming and rushing yards and touchdowns, averaged over 5.5 yards per carry, didn't fumble on over 350 touches at the collegiate level. And not only that, but Devontae Freeman and Austin Hooper's absences, they vacate just so much opportunity. Between those two alone, over 12 targets per game. And I don't think that trickles down to one player individual. I think it helps everyone involved. Last week, I saw that Brian Hill had 38 snaps, and I just thought, oh, okay, like Kadri Allison wasn't active, or they didn't have their backups active. But both Kenyon Barner and Kadri Allison were active, and Brian Hill still snapped both 38-10 and got 22 touches on those 38 snaps. So now just imagine him getting 45 to 55 snaps in what we think will be a competitive shootout. It's just an immense amount of touches and volume that you can't pass on. It's sort of like Wayne Gallman's first week, where we know the guy isn't good. I actually do think Brian Hill may be good.
Oh, I thought you were going to start saying Wayne Gallman is good, and I was like, what?
No. Well, Wayne Gallman I still don't think is good. But either way, it's just that situation, whether you think he's an athlete, whether you think he's good or not, it's kind of overthinking the situation. I think you just play him because he's locked in into some of the best opportunity of any position this week.
Yeah, and I will say, as far as looking at this from a shootout standpoint, I don't necessarily like the Falcons passing game all that much. I think Julio's just looking at projected ownership right now. We've got him at 20%. I'm not sure he's going to be that high. I don't even like him that much. And I do worry about a game script where both these teams are likely to be running a lot. You have Chris McCaffrey on one side. Brian Hill's going to be running a lot on the other side. Do you worry about this game, just seeing a lot of rushes and maybe the clock just ticking down a little bit too quick for a lot of people to get there from a fantasy standpoint, Reeves?
It's possible. Like I said, it just depends on how real was that defensive Falcons performance last week, and how much was it just bad offense by the Saints. I mean, we'll get an answer this week. I still definitely believe that this game is worth, dabbling and stacking just based on, what we saw from 8 weeks. They said the personnel didn't change. Like, how much can scheme really, lift the tide that highly to turn a defense that was the bottom 3 defense in the league to one that looked like a top 5 defense? I don't really think that I'm gonna stock that for complete ownership. So I mean, if it ends up being to where the Falcons can't run, I mean, we know that they are totally fine with just winging it all over the yard. They've done it kind of all year. Matt Ryan, I mean, it's kind of weird because, I don't like, we talk about, like batter versus pitcher and, baseball and like how real is that? And we talk about splits sometimes versus opponents, but I like splits when the regimes don't change. When you have these teams that are divisional plays and the regimes have been steady and they haven't really flip-flopped, like coordinators aren't changing, head coaches aren't changing. And we have that in this matchup. And Matt Ryan has owned the Panthers. Like, his past 7 games, the most amount of points he scored is 18.1. He's averaged 24 fantasy points per game against the past 6 meetings against Carolina. He just has a track record where he's really damaged them. And like I said, when you have these regimes that don't change, and like the overall like player personnel doesn't change a lot, I stock that a little more than just saying like, oh yeah, well this guy was good against the Bucs 8 years ago when whoever was there. These are 2 head coaches that have been there the whole time. That over that sample, teams have played like similar schemes, and Matt Ryan has roasted them. The team's not as good this year, but they're totally capable to throw the football all over anybody in a given week and stack production, even if it's gross. We've seen that a number of times this year. And the Panthers are giving up big games to big wide receivers. Devontae Adams, 7 for 118. Mike Evans, 9 for 96. DJ Shark, 8 for 164 and 2. They've played in some of these shootouts, man. Like, they've given up some back and forth games, even though they are really good on a per play basis against the pass. They've given up, a couple big, passing games, of late, to guys like, Ryan Tannehill and Gardner Minshew. So there is still upside here for this passing game, even though on a per play basis, Carolina is better against the pass than they are against the run.
Yeah, from an ownership standpoint, nobody's going to be on them because everybody's playing Brian Hill.
It makes total sense.
All right, let's talk about some quarterbacks. And, we can always talk about the Lamar Jacksons, the Deshaun Watson of the world. Unfortunately for me, who is always on teams to play Mahomes, he's not on this slate. So I'm needing somebody else, Daigle. I'm sitting here scrolling down the lobby saying, no, he seems like too much. No, he's too expensive. I say, maybe I can play Kyle Allen. Maybe I can play some Carson Wentz at home against the Patriots. I don't know, Daigle. Who are you looking at a quarterback this week?
I mean, I'm actually kind of shocked we didn't talk about him last game because this is the bad quarterback show. It would be a disservice not to talk about Kyle Allen. And yes, it does really depend on, do we get the Falcons, the 6 sacks Falcons from last week, or do we get the Falcons that came into that game last in sacks, tied for last in interceptions, bottom 3 in pressure rate created. But the fact is, DJ Moore is far too cheap on FanDuel and is due for positive regression, 27% target share of the last month, and yet hasn't scored a touchdown. And then you have the fact that the Panthers in general, their passing touchdown to rushing touchdown ratio, as JJ Zachariason, friend of the show, has pointed out, is just far too wonky to not regress. It's the craziest rate since 2011, I believe. So we would expect positive regression as well. So given all of that, and given the fact that I don't buy into the Falcons' defensive change, Kyle Allen, and we're talking about on DraftKings here, where they're pricing up their guys extremely high. Like Kyle Allen at 5,300, I think is a legitimate play if you're looking for a cheap quarterback.
Yeah, I don't think he's the craziest thing out there ever.
I think it's actually like maybe an elite play. I'm not even kidding.
I bet we have a lot of Kyle Allen and cash takes.
Yeah.
I bet as this week goes on, there are going to be a lot of people talking about Kyle Allen and cash just because, again, you want to fit the Christian McCaffreys and the Michael Thomases into your lineup. Reeves, are you going Kyle Allen or are you going a guy like Carson Wentz? I keep wanting somebody to talk about Carson Wentz for reasons I don't necessarily understand. Oh, God, I'm getting the Naj head shake from Reeves. Talk to me, bro.
I mean, Carson Wentz has been bad, man. Like, why? Like, he hasn't even been good.
This is the bad quarterback show.
I know that is true. But this team's, the Eagles have kind of just manifested like a 12 personnel team. They run a lot of 2 tight end sets now. They've turned into a power running team too of late, and that's where the Patriots have been most vulnerable. So I think that they'll actually continue to run 2 tight ends.
I have Jordan Howard written down, buddy, for the next segment. Don't you worry.
I mean, I'm not going to play Jordan Howard, but when we talk about that archetype of play, like that's the price when I want to play those guys when they're 4,700. That's when I want to play those guys because you don't get completely boned when they don't score a touchdown. Like, you can have over 100 yards and just still kind of be okay instead of paying $7,000 for Marlon Mack and then getting jammed. Yeah, I mean, I just don't believe you look at it, and he's been under 200 yards, I think, in 5 of his past 6 games. It's just tough, man. It's tough to really go down the Wentz train. There are a lot of quarterbacks, so it's a great quarterback slate. I like, the Kyle Allen take a lot. I mean, I would have no problem paying up for Dak Prescott if you guys wanted to play him. He has 18 or more fantasy points in 8 of his 9 games this year, 20 or more in 7. Detroit's 29th in passing points allowed per game. They just allowed 19.7 points to Mitchell Trubisky. So that's really all you need to know about that. In the dome, indoors, I mean, it's really hard to get away from. Like, Dak Prescott's another great play. That game has, some potential, too, to kind of be a little better than people think as well. You got Josh Allen against the Dolphins. He's had 3 career games against the Dolphins, had over 20 points in all 3 of those games. How about going really terrible? You guys want to play a really bad quarterback?
Oh, Kyle Allen wasn't really terrible. Okay.
No, I think there might be somebody. Is he cheaper than Kyle Allen?
He's cheaper than Kyle Allen.
Is it Dwayne Haskins?
Yeah, man, it's Dwayne Haskins. I wanted to play Trubisky last week, so this is Daniel Jones. This week, it's Daniel Jones for the same reasons of Dwayne Haskins. So Dwayne Haskins has only come in and started 1 game where he took starters reps, came in and started before the bye against the Bills. And he wasn't like the worst thing ever. He wasn't a good fantasy play by any means, but like he didn't like light everything on fire like I think a lot of people thought he was going to do. Now he gets a Jets team that is good, really good against the run, and is just inviting teams to just throw all over them. So you've got, look at their last 3 games and the 3 quarterbacks they played. Gardner Minshew, 23.2 fantasy points. Ryan Fitzpatrick, 23.7 fantasy points. Daniel Jones, 30.3 fantasy points. There is upside here. Now, he's not a guy you're going to lean on. If you play him, you should expect to lose money. But you might win some too, based on, but I mean, we'll talk about McLaurin too. I mean, McLaurin, I think, is a really great play this week as well. I mean, that's how bad this Jets passing defense is. We talked about it last week, wanting to play Golden Tate and Darius Slayton, and those guys ended up popping.
I'm sitting here looking at a lineup. You can absolutely play Haskins, McLaurin, Thomas, and McCaffrey together. You can do it. I'm looking at the lineup right now. You can do it. And it's not even the worst lineup in history. It's close, but it's not quite the worst rest of the lineup in history. Let's talk some running backs, because one of the guys that I'm going to have trouble fading this week is Josh Jacobs. He's 6.9K over on DraftKings. Big home favorite against Cincinnati. We know that John Gruden loves to give him the ball, give a bell cow running back the ball as often as possible. And Jacobs is just a guy I know he's questionable right now. I think he's going to be fine. Daigle, I feel like he's just a really easy play on this slate.
Yeah, and I would worry, if anything, I know we're probably talking about cash, but I would worry that his ownership gets incredulously high, because I think everyone's just going to see it. I mean, we saw it last week. The Bengals just, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Mark Ingram, efficient on 15 carries, 115 yards. They just can't stop the run. And that's their big thing. They can't stop anything, but for the most part, they just can't stop the run. And now it's Josh Jacobs' turn for an Oakland offense that continues getting better and continues getting stronger, despite the fact that Darren Waller continues fading away each and every week. So, yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs, I think, is the top play on the board that everyone will know about. We also talked about Jordan Howard a little bit earlier, recently smashed by Nick Chubb for 120 yards against the Patriots. And then last week, and then Mark Ingram also before the Patriots went on bye, 115 yards. And then J.D. McKissick, I think if Ty Johnson is out, ran a route, 37 routes over Paul Perkins at 6 on 70% of Jeff Driscoll's dropbacks. So if you do have Dak Prescott, and I think Dak Prescott to Amari Cooper and or Gallup is an amazing stack. I love Dak this week. Then I don't think it's the worst idea to have Ty Johnson running it back with him for cheaper on DraftKings specifically.
Yeah, you talk about J.D. McKissick. That's somebody that's just running so many routes, like you said. And Paul Perkins, he's not really stealing that much action from McKissick. I have no problem there. Reeves, what do you think about some running backs?
Well, that's a good guys. I mean, listen, if everyone's going to play McCaffrey and then skip down to Jacobs, does that mean that no one wants to play Dalvin Cook? Are we in a week where no one wants to play Dalvin Cook?
Strategy right there.
Probably.
I mean, kind of stuck in limbo there. I mean, he's second in the league in yards from scrimmage. He's facing a huge home favorite against the backfield that is 29th in the NFL and how many running back touches they face per game. I mean, I was just thinking about that because you guys have mentioned the two guys. I mean, the thing with Jacobs, and it's such a good spot, obviously, on paper, because Cincinnati is minus 1.9 yards per rushing play than their opponent. That's dead last in the league. Oakland is third in terms of rushing yardage gain per play than their opponents. So they're kind of good, and that kind of cross correlates there. The thing about Jacobs is he's one of these guys, man. 90% of his points are solely from rushing. It's the highest rate of all top 24 scorers in the league. So I mean, it's all rushing. Any touchdowns can be kind of fluky. If you don't get one, he's not really a guy that's going to get you a lot of points. To circumvent not getting in the end zone. He could have one of those games where he gets you 120 yards on the ground and gets you one catch for 12 yards. He's definitely in that type of mold. Down the line, I'm thinking that people probably might never want to play Leonard Fournette. I mean, they just keep talking to him every week. Touches, keep holding out for those touchdowns. The touches are there. And then if we're not going to get Matt Breida, I mean, it's going to be hard to ignore Tevin Coleman.
Yeah.
In that backfield, I mean, they had 128 yards from scrimmage against the Cardinals when these teams played 2 weeks ago. The Cardinals are a team that give up a lot of yards from scrimmage. Running backs 144.3. That's 23rd in the league. Both Bucs guys kind of did well last week. Saw Ronald Jones in the passing game. Even if you want to get cute, I don't even think that if you wanted to throw a deep dart, that Raheem Mostert wouldn't even be a terrible dart to play just because of how many touches they get. In the 2 games that Breida didn't play, Mostert had 16 and 12 touches. I don't know how much carryover that has with Coleman being the the alpha instead of, it being Breida, because, they've kind of had kid gloves at Breida always. So, I don't know if you'll get that kind of touch juice, but, those are some guys, kind of on the radar there.
Yeah, I like the Coleman call. Dalvin Cook's interesting. Like, nobody's going to play him, like you said, on a slate where, nobody's playing Zeke either. And this is spot.
And
Zeke against the Lions.
Yeah.
Zeke against the Lions. And then obviously without Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, that trickle down has gone to him in the passing game as well.
God, there are a lot of good running backs on this slate. I'm going to have to – it's going to be tough to narrow it down.
You're going to have to use Kyle Allen. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. What are you talking about? I've got Dwayne Haskins here. I'm good to go.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you saved money.
Yeah, Dwayne Haskins and our boy, Scary Terry McLaurin. He's going to be up. He's the wide receiver. It's funny that you guys brought him up because he was actually who I was going to talk about, 5,600 over on DK. I love the price tag. I don't like that Haskins is throwing him the football since, it's Dwayne Haskins and he sucks. But at the same time, I like McLaurin this week. Daigle, what about you? Where are you going at wide receiver?
Yeah, I'll let Reeves extrapolate on McLaurin a little bit because I like McLaurin as well. But I think a popular pick is going to be Deebo Samuel. 70 snaps on Monday night. We saw him 8 catches for over 100 yards. And without Sanders and Kittle, pending injury reports, but Sanders and Kittle in general vacate 32% of 49ers targets since Sanders joined the team. It's such a huge target share. We are likely going to get Samuel in a great spot against the Cardinals as their only true receiver. As we saw, that offense will probably tank as a whole without Kittle and Sanders out there like they did on Monday night. But the opportunity and the matchup alone are a great spot. D.D. Westbrook, if you have him on best ball or season long, the whole reason you chased him from the very beginning is because Nick Foles came into the year targeting his slot receiver at the second highest rate over the last 2 seasons. And then Andrew Luck retired. And so now Nick Foles is technically targeting his slot receiver at the highest rate among all quarterbacks over the last 2 seasons. And so no one's going to be on that play. And I think he sees over 10 targets. Tyler Boyd as well, got 8 targets from Ryan Finley. Oakland's corners and Oakland's secondary are still very bad, and they are likely going to be playing catch-up the entire time. And Alex Erickson, pending availability, he may be out, vacates even more for Tyler Boyd. And Philip Dorsett, if you want to pivot off Mohamed Sanu, even though Mohamed Sanu is a great play. Philip Dorsett, I know Mohamed Sanu got the 14 targets the last time the Patriots, we saw them play. But this is once again a bad Eagles secondary. Has allowed a top 5 rate of fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And Philip Dorsett only played 1 fewer snap and ran 1 fewer route than Sanu in that game. The targets just went to Sanu. So both of those options I think are really good too.
To be fair, I think the targets should have gone to Sanu since he is the greatest receiver in the history of football.
I don't know about that, buddy.
Reeves, who else you got a wide receiver that you're looking at?
Yeah, Mohamed Sanu, forever in your heart. For good reason as well.
Right.
But
makes sense.
Yeah. Terry McLaurin obviously is a guy that I'm drawn to this week. I mean, for similar reasons as Darius Slayton, the vertical guy against the Jets. I mean, so the Jets over the past 3 weeks, they faced the Jaguars wide receivers. They gave up 13 catches for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns to those guys. Then they faced the Dolphins receivers. They gave up 15 catches for 181 yards and 3 touchdowns to those guys. Then the Giants wide receivers, they gave up 16 catches for 232 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's not exactly the strongest rogues gallery of wide receivers to face. So, I mean, you at least got some pulse here. Now you have to swallow the Dwayne Haskins element. If Dwayne Haskins is just completely not, the shower narrative is dead. If we get any of that bounce back, McLaurin's averaged just 5.6 yards per target from Haskins on just a skimpy 7 targets. Still a relatively young, fresh sample size there. But he averaged 10.7 yards per target from Case Keenum. I really wish Case Keenum was playing.
Yeah, we need Case Keenum, and I've never said that until now. We need Case Keenum.
I would be really happy if Case Keenum was starting this game.
Yeah,
he takes a step of faith. He still takes a step of faith. But, here we are in week 11, and, kind of like DJ Moore, John Brown his price never changes. DJ Moore is kind of in the same boat. Like John Brown just ho-humly puts these games up where he's productive. He's had 5 or more catches in 7 games, 4 or more catches in every game, over 50 yards as you've heard of every game. Just really strong floor. He had a wide receiver 11 finish against the Dolphins in week 7. He had 83 yards and a touchdown. Just another good matchup, this time in probably better weather. in Miami. So just keep going back to the John Brown well. I think I'm obligated to mention John Brown once a week on this show.
John Brown, go ahead. I was just going to say John Brown is so good and even as a floor, but just the fact that Josh Allen regressed even further on his deep passing, like 11 of 40 on passes 20-plus yards downfield, is that's the kicker. Like, it sucks so much because John Brown is technically open all the time downfield.
It's just so weird because we come into these years, saying, okay, John Brown was this big-time deep threat guy, and, he's boom or bust every week. And this year, that just hasn't been the case, as Reeves was just saying. Yeah. As consistent as it gets. We got to get out of here. We got to make way for Pro Football Focus Show. Daigle, tell the people where they can find it.
RotoWorld.com and RotoWorld Football Podcast. You can go subscribe on iTunes, and then we'll be back on NBC Sports, Twitch, and YouTube for the RotoWorld Fantasy Football Show at 12 p.m. Eastern, Sunday.
Reeves, where can the people find you, my man?
Sharp Football Analysis. Definitely go there. Hit up this end of the season run as we make it there. If you come check out the worksheet and all the other stuff we have to offer.
All right. Guys, it's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it. Go Terry McLaurin. Go Dwayne Haskins. Go
Kyle Allen. Don't you forget him.
Yeah, that's right. We'll get the Superflex League, DFS League. We'll play Dwayne Haskins and Kyle Allen together and just we'll lose all of our money at that point. It's been a lot of fun, guys. Good luck in your contest. We'll catch y'all later. Peace.